Welcome to Civil Discourse Now. I'm Mark Small. I'm your host. It is January 11th, 2021. 9 on this date, I was a page in the Indiana General Assembly for one day. I just remember that date. And I remember going across the bridge on Meridian and looking down and seeing the water station. I didn't know it was the Worthley water station at the time. But I remember seeing that. I didn't realize like 50 years later I'd live in that neighborhood. But I also had this bandage on my forehead from having made contact with the floor the previous evening in basketball practice, and then I had a basketball game that night. But it's like February 11th always comes back to my recollections of having paged that day and then played basketball that night, somewhat wounded. I forget who we played. I'll try to look it up. Anyways, welcome to Civil Discourse Now. Right now we have the impeachment trial of Donald J. Trump going on. You know, people talk about twofers, and Trump got a twofer there. He's been impeached twice. But it's rather odd that he should be a candidate who extols law and order, and yet he has seemingly violated laws with impunity. Part of what I found interesting was not just the United States Constitution. We have an Indiana Constitution. A lot of people don't think much of it. They don't seem to notice it very much. But we have a Constitution that protects our rights more greatly than the federal government through its Constitution. And it's interesting that we have a treason against the state is in Article 1, Section 28 of our Constitution, and that's our Bill of Rights. It states, treason against the state shall consist only in levying war against it and in giving aid and comfort to its enemies. Now, I gotta say that the way in which coaches, especially from Michigan State and that Val College to the south of us, have coached our players in recent years makes me believe that they are, if they're not enemies of the state, they're sure not friends. But I wouldn't say we should charge anybody with treason under that. On the other hand, we do have serious charges against Trump, and those serious charges relate to insurrection and something that he fomented on January 6th, actually in the months leading up to January 6th. The line is open, 317-517-2037. If you want to call in. I think I got hooked up on YouTube and on Facebook. YouTube is Civil Discourse Now. Facebook is civildiscoursenow.com. If you're watching, you've got to be watching on one of those. Either that or you've hacked into my computer, in which case there's nothing here. Witness protection already took care of that stuff. They do that on a regular basis. Anyways, I find it interesting that politics are or is our political situation day to day in this country is discussed in various places. But what's odd is that there's a political board and rants and raves also on Craigslist. I guess that the hookups and everything went south, and so they had to do something to fill that space. And it's rather, I think, probably a workshop in insanity. Some of the people on there are under illusions about reason. They don't understand how to phrase an argument. They don't understand that you make an argument by setting forth a contention. You support that contention with citation of facts of some sort, evidence, and you draw a conclusion from that. I learned that years ago, and we would have quote cards when we would debate, and you'd have files of them on whatever topics you were arguing, and you set your arguments up, you state what your arguments were, and cite evidence for each one of those. The best that I can tell from MAGA people, and I think it's MAGA because they put the T on the end for their fearless leader, who's not real fearless. I mean, he didn't have the guts to fire anybody on his show, The Apprentice, and he certainly didn't fight in any wars. But they will say very blunt things that have nothing to do with phrases or arguments or anything. It's like calling people libtards or idiots or stringing together not very colorful obscenities, profanities, guttural expressions. But that really is the essence of Trump. Trump didn't really have arguments. And what we're looking at right now is a culmination of absurdities. Let's start with the notion that the election was stolen from Trump, and that somehow 74 million people were disenfranchised. Over 81 million people voted for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. So what you're saying by saying, well, 74 million were disenfranchised, that's what happens when you lose. And it's not disenfranchisement then. It's losing an election. And that doesn't mean you lost your right to vote. It means you cast your vote and your person, your candidate, lost. So that's not disenfranchisement. Now that is an irony because it's being stated by people who have advocated now in recent years that the Republican Party should do its best to limit the ability of people to vote who, as categories of people, would be far less likely to vote for Republicans and far more likely to vote for candidates of the Democratic Party. That is disenfranchisement. That's specifically using as a goal keeping people from voting so that you can win. Now, that didn't happen in this last election. How do we know that? Republican officials in individual states said it didn't happen. Let me repeat that again. Republican officials in individual states, election officials charged with overseeing the election, stated it didn't happen. I saw one person said on Facebook, well, what are you going to say about the ballots that were shoved under the table and stuff in Georgia? A Republican election official from Georgia explained that was doctored footage presented by the president's attorney, Rudy Giuliani. That actually, what had happened was everybody was getting ready to call it a day on counting votes. That usually what they would do is go to like 10 or 12 o'clock at night. That place for counting votes, they would call it quits, come back the next morning. And if you've ever worked an election, worked at the polls, it can be a grind. You're there all day. You can't really leave the place. You can't here in Indiana. You can't go away from a polling site if you're working as the judge for the election site. They still have judges. I think they do. They don't have sheriff anymore. But if you represent one of the parties there and you're working as an election official, you can't leave. So it gets to be a long day, especially when you're showing up at like 6 in the morning and you can't leave until 6 or 7 at night. It makes it a long day. So these people have been there counting votes all day. They think they're going to be going. So they're packing up everything to make sure everything is in order the way it's supposed to be. Partway through that, they get word, we're supposed to keep on counting. So they're pulling things out. Now that election official from Georgia is a Republican and said there was nothing wrong about that. Okay? So lay that one to rest. Pinheads. Now, what about dead people voting? And this was what the Secretary of State of Georgia, who was supported by Trump. Trump supported the guy until the guy turned against what Trump wanted. Trump wanted him to rig the election. Trump wanted to steal the election for his boss, Vladimir Putin. And by the way, Vlad, if you're watching today, Yabat Tetya. Trump wanted him to steal the election for Trump. If you find a way to find me 11,080 votes, whatever, that's stealing the election. When the Secretary of State refused to do that, then all of a sudden he's a bad guy. Well, no, he actually was doing his job. He was sworn to do the job honestly. And so, well, that probably says, probably isn't in the oath of office for Secretary of State of Georgia. I solemnly swear or affirm to protect, defend the Constitution of the United States, Constitution of the State of Georgia, and I'll do it honestly. I mean, if you have to add that honestly in there, in the oath, that's kind of like maybe saying everybody else isn't so honest. So that Secretary of State, in terms of dead people voting, said 2. They found 2 instances. And when you consider all of the millions of votes cast in the state of Georgia, 6, 7 million, I don't know what it was, millions of votes, to have 2 come up like that is to be expected. If something like that, the persons who are responsible for that, if it was done intentionally, unless somebody from the zombie apocalypse walked in and decided to get support, those individuals should be charged, and if found guilty by a jury, they should suffer criminal penalties for what they've done in casting illegal votes, because that's illegal. Acting like a dead person. Well, acting like a dead person, usually. But, although some, never mind. But, falsely identifying yourself in order to cast a ballot in somebody else's name is against the law. And if somebody did that, by the way, it's 317-517-2037. If somebody did that, they should be prosecuted. But that was 2 votes for dead people. That was it. They checked the votes in Wisconsin, another swing state, that Trump, loser that he is, lost. They couldn't find any evidence of voter fraud, despite the fact that they made people stand out in line in areas in which Trump was not heavily favored, let's put it that way, and they risked in a pandemic getting COVID. Now, I have one public official email to me today saying some of us don't live in fear. Really, I think that that's something that, given our times and the way in which the Republican Party has baited people, fear would be something that's in their playbook. It'd be on the first page. Republican GOP playbook for an election. Fear, use it. Voter suppression, tool. You know, you just go through it and you realize, oh, okay, that's what they're about. Because they're not about anything positive. They don't do anything anymore that's positive. All that Trump wanted to do was tear down what President Barack Obama had put into effect. I don't agree with a lot of what President Obama did in terms of policies and different things that he promulgated. I mean, that's something that's going to happen. I disagree with people on stuff. But Trump killed people. Over 400,000 people died in COVID because of his ineptitude. And you got to wonder, you know, Vladimir Putin was wanting to discredit the United States. And from what Trump did to our election for Putin, the Russian press is having a heyday. Now, I know a lot of people don't pay much attention to what the press says in Russia and China and the rest of the world. A lot of people really don't acknowledge that the world exists outside of the United States. But they're laughing at us. They were laughing several years ago when Trump got into office. That's what Putin paid for guy's rubles were. July 4th of 2017, when United States senators, Republican senators, went to Russia, on July 4th, who does that? And they're all just right in line, not wanting to get anybody upset with them. Who are they upset? I think we saw them. People went into the Capitol building. Some were armed with firearms. They went in with specific plans. They went in kidnap or to kill. 5 people died. Now, that was wrong. That was insurrection. Insurrection. Interesting. You have to go through several pages of definitions related to insurance in Black's Law Dictionary before you come to insurrection. And it is a violent revolt against an oppressive authority, usually a government. So that's the definition in Black's. It's against the government. Is it oppressive? I don't know. I don't think that the government, as we have it right now, is any more oppressive than it was under Trump. But that was the government under Trump, against which the insurrection was aimed, or at which. So, as this plays out over the next few days, and we see that, yes, you can impeach a person who's no longer in office, but see, Trump was impeached when he still was in office. He would have been tried. They would have begun the trial. But McConnell refused to call the Senate back in session. Well, we can't run the Senate back in session right now because we're all on vacation and it's not going to happen. I mean, so we are having a trial now. Last bit on the trial. What was really depressing was to hear that there were several United States senators from the Republican Party who said last evening that they were shocked with what went on. And what happened was abhorrent. But they couldn't vote, and did. So, I don't know what it takes to get convicted sufficiently, or what kind of an act it takes to warrant conviction after impeachment. I know a blowjob in the Oval Office seems to qualify there. That happened to Clinton. I don't think that Trump enjoyed anything like that. Certainly not from his wife. Not from the way that she looked anytime he tried to touch her. And I doubt that she really wanted to touch him. Although she did renegotiate her prenup immediately after the election in 2016. Putin gave her some good attorneys. We have our decoder rings. I have to figure out how we're going to figure out who's going to get decoder rings, because you cannot have a deep state or anything that opposes an Antifa sufficiently unless you've got decoder rings. And I've got my decoder ring here. So tomorrow we're going to talk more about the impeachment trial, try to come up with a scoreboard of how things are going. Because, you know, I just think that the first day when Trump's one lawyer came up and was not making a very good showing of, unless he was rambling about being there in the Senate, I don't think that they've got a whole bunch more to say, except this. You like mob lawyers walking in and just saying, we got it won anyway, we know we're going to get the votes, not worry about it. You don't have to say anything, don't put on our witnesses. They just go ahead and have the jury vote. Right now, come on, let's do it, hey. Not that happens anyplace, but which is fiction, untouchables. Only in the United States Senate. My name's Mark Small. This is is Civil Discourse Now. We'll be back tomorrow at the same time. Like I said, Vladimir Putin, Yevat Tevya. Take care.